Okay, so this is my overview review of something I've been promising for a long time, and this is a complete series of Luther Strode. This came out a number of years ago now from Image by Justin Jordan, but the star of the show nowadays would be Tradmore the artist, who kind of exploded with Silver Surfer Black, and now especially with the new Doctor Strange comic, the very trippy Doctor Strange comic he did for Marvel this year. So this collects all three series, 6 issues each, and the synopsis is Luther Strode is an average teenage nerd until he sends away for the Hercules method, a bodybuilding course that promises to give him the body of his dreams, but the powers he unleashes makes him a larger target for murder cults as old as mankind, and it costs him almost everything and takes him across the world in a fight to take back his life. And it's older series, so it collects the Strange Talent of Luther Strode 1 to 6, Legend of Luther Strode, and the Legacy of Luther Strode. Now today I must be concentrating, depends how long it takes me, I'll be concentrating more on the first book, sort of like basically like the origin story. But yeah, that's kind of like the Tradmore that we know and love on the front cover. Very stylized, almost like psychedelic design layout. Like a lot of this it reminds me very much like the Woodstock poster artists. So normally I don't take notes for when I'm doing a series, but I did do for this one because it generates so many feelings. Not feelings about the art, feelings about the pace of the story, about the style of the story, the comic beats, the plot beats. So I wrote down a few things that just popped into my head. So first thing I said was that's the best way to describe this comic, if you're describing it to somebody who wasn't a comic reader, I'd say it's like Takashi Miike's Ichi the Killer film meets Highlander. So you've got the gross out, hyper stylized, hyper violent stylings of Ichi the Killer with the lore and the generational curse kind of story of Highlander. And then I've carried on with other thoughts that came to my head. So I said it also reminds me of Doc Savage by way of Fist of the North Star. So you've got the pulpy action of Doc Savage with the hyper-violence of Fist of the North Star. And it's the violence of Keanu Reeves' Berserker dialed up to 100. It's as if Dicto and Steranko one night got hold of a load of steroids and peyote and produced a love child, and that's where you get the art style of Tradmore. And I've also put, going back to Berserker, said it makes Boom's Berserker look like a children's book with regards to the violence that's inside, and it upends the Eternal Champion Ubermensch trope, what's used by a lot of comics, especially since Eternal Warrior came out. So yeah, those are what came into my head as I was reading it. So if you notice, there's a bit of like invisible tape on my cover, but I'm not bothered because this book retails for $39.99, so it cost me normally about £30, £32 to buy it. I got it for £5 from a Comic Con last year because of the rips in the cover. So I can put a bit of tape on, doesn't matter. Once the tape's on, I'm the only one who's going to read it, so I'm not going to sell it. So let's crack it open, and that straight away gives you some indication of how violent a comic it will be straight from the get-go with that cover. So like I said, I think this is Tradmore's first professional work. This is what made his name, and again that cover. And it opens with a very, very graphic first page. As you can see, there's a lot of red ink in this comic. This whole scene here, hyperviolence, and I mean, look at that. He kicks that guy's chest in, literally punches another guy's face clean off. It makes Red Room look like a children's book in places. I can't stand Red Room. I love Ed Piscott. I love his artwork, but Red Room turns my stomach because it's more torture porn. Whereas this, there's a means to it's extreme violence. It's like the story of Ricky O as well, where it's cartoon violence, and it's about this guy here who's mates with the shorter guy, and he's a tall, lanky guy, but he's puny as anything. They're basically typical harmless school nerds. So he sends off for this bodybuilding course, and he starts following the routines, the practices. So Shades of the Shadow and Doc Savage there, and then it flashes to this story with the main villain of this arc anyway, and it just carries on as per normal. And this character here, this girl here, she becomes the main character, and there's our main guy, the nerd. So it basically sets up, the first issue sets up the villain, the main antagonist, and it sets up the main protagonist, and it shows his life before he becomes the fighting machine that he becomes. And he doesn't have an easy life of it, but things that he gets bullied and picked on at school by this guy, but things are slowly changing, and it shows here. His powers suddenly start kicking in. Then it flashes back to the villain, and again, so much red. And that's the first chapter. So, like I said, this first story arc is more about how he gets him developing his powers, and each issue just slowly shows his body growing and growing in strength and reflexes, mind over body, and everything like that. He's slowly becoming this Superman. So it's not instantaneous. It's not like a flash lightning bolt where somebody gets his power. It gets stronger and stronger with time, and it gets more ridiculous with time. With the power, anybody who's got this power, they see people just as blood sacks. Basically, they can see all the bodies, so they know where to hit, where to get, and it gives them this like blood hunger to cause violence all the time. So he even sees it on his friend. And as you can see, his body is slowly getting stronger. And basically twats this guy, the guy who's the school bully, and he wants his revenge. And progresses. Hold on. I'm holding this on the pole and it's getting quite heavy. His body slowly progresses with the meditation and exercise that he does in the book that he sent off for. And it becomes more and more super powered. And so it focuses on some local crimes, and he intervenes, and that's his first, like, in quotes, superhero act. And so he gets a mask, and I don't know if you can see, it's Tradmore artwork, but it's very different to the Tradmore artwork we have now. It reminds me very much of I forgot his name, the Batman White Knight artist. His kind of style, his early stuff. But this again why I want to do it in 3 parts, because his art style progresses so much with each volume. It develops so much. So his friend is like, he's so happy that his mate's got all these powers because he wants to make him into a superhero, give him a costume and everything. So this is more of his trying out his powers and becoming a vigilante. And again, more hyper violence. And his date with the girl progresses much more. She's got a backstory as well. And more examples of hyper violence. Now, I'm definitely going to have to cut this off soon because my battery is running low. So, chapter 4, I'll speed on with these ones. focuses on the villain. So their two lives are going to get more and more interconnected now. They meet up now, one of the main villains, well, the main villain for this arc anyway. And it says that they've got a shared kind of history, which you'll find about once you read the book. So this one does focus a lot on the villains. The dialogue in this is so easy and flows so well. It's not a deep book by all means. It's not a deep comic. That's his dad, that's Luffy Strode's dad, who's basically a bum, and the villain tries to use him as like a leverage point with Luffy, and it goes into that guy's back history. Like I said, it's very much like Eternal Warrior, Berserker, where it all goes back to where these people have been around for thousands of years, and they can live for a very long time once they embrace these powers. So this is like Luffy's heritage as well, and that's, again, more hyperviolence. So this deals with that. Just focus for an instance on that. It's brutal. It is so brutal. Nobody's safe, and I mean nobody. There's quite a few what the F moments when I was reading this. And chapter 5. So his mum gets involved and his best friend stands by him. And the villain finds out about this. So yeah, everything started to conspire against him and his family and friends, all because of this power. The bad guys want to turn him to their side, but then there's the ones who he's tried to bring to justice who are also against him as well. So the villain, there's two sets of villains. One's are going out gunning for revenge, and the other one basically just wants to beat him to a pulp so that he will join and embrace his destiny, as it were. And so the main antagonist, locates his mum, and I'll skip over that So that chapter 5 has two huge shocks, which impacts his life badly, as you can see by this page here. And I'll skip over that bit because you really do need to read this. You will really enjoy it. So this is the payoff, the big fight with the main villain for this arc. And like I said, the red spaghetti sauce gets more and more prominent. Like I said, I thought Berserker was hard-boiled and bloody. I thought hard-boiled was hard-boiled. This ramps it up. And when you think they've killed somebody, they're not always dead, even if they've ripped the heart out, twisted the head off. And that's where it ends. Like I said, I'm keeping it very vague. So that's the end of book 1. So my impressions after reading that first book, I took breaks between each book. So I took like a break of a week to 2 weeks between each book, just to let it digest. But the artwork in the first book is so different from Trabmore's modern style. But what's good if I do this in chunks, the great thing about it, you'll see how his artwork just changes so much. I could picture the Wachowskis grabbing hold of the rights to this and doing a really good trilogy of films with it, or TV series. Berserker owes a lot to this comic, but then again, on the flip side, this comic owes a lot to Highlander and owes a lot to Eternal Warrior. It's like I said, it's Eternal Warrior splatterpunk version. It's violence as hell, but the violence is very attractive, if that makes sense. Like a good John Woo movie is. But yeah, the fight choreography is brilliant. The storyline is a weird mix of humour, brutality, sexiness in small places, and shock. And after you finish the first 6 issues, you're like, whoa. You feel like your brain's been pulverised. But then after a few weeks, you start getting an itch to read more of Luffy Strode. And then after that, the next 6 issues, you feel even more battered. but you love the ride. It was a hell of a ride, and yeah, it makes ultra-violence sexy, which you can't say about a lot of comics. Like some comics, like Mark Millar, for example, they do violence, and you think, ugh, because it sounds weird, but you can do a violent comic and it can be good. It's like you can do a violent film and it can be good, like John Wick, or you can do a violent film like Hostel, where it's like, ugh, horrible. And that's like this. This is like this. I could read this. Like I said, I need a few weeks to recover from each sitting, but I can't read something like Red Room. It just makes me feel sick. This doesn't. It's cartoon violence, and it's a fun trip. Everything's hyper stylized, hyper realistic, and hyper fun. So for the first 6 issues, it's a good introduction to the world of Luther Strode, and I will do another one in the next week or so of the second volume, and then we'll do the final volume after that. Just so you can see the evolution. I think it's good to have a break in between with the reviews as well. But if you want something fresh, something not challenging, something that's an easy read, but it's a challenge for your senses, try it. You can get it in individual books, free books, or you can get this big chunky one like this. Like I said, I was lucky. I got this dirt cheap, really cheap. But it's money well spent, and there's a lot of backmaster in the collected one where it goes through the whole process. It even shows the letter the writer wrote to Tradmore to get him on board for the project. So yeah, I would give this an easy 9 out of 10. It's very, very original. It came out at a time when the whole Sin City and that kind of violent pulpy comic had gone out of vogue again. So this was like a bit of a poke in the eye to the more sedate era of indie comics and superhero comics. What around that time in the I think it's like the 2010, something like that. So yeah, do try it, and like I said, I will be back with 2 more videos focused on the other 2 books of this. Okay, thanks. Do apologise for my voice. This is why I've not shown my face. I'm full of hay fever at the moment, so my voice has dropped about 10 octaves, and I'm really like, just really annoyed with it, tickly throat all the time. But I might do the next one facing to scare you. Okay, bye bye.